Yo, what's good, my great sages? It's your host, Sage D Samurai here, now here today to bring y'all a new What If, this being the What If movie to What If Deku was Rayleigh's reincarnation. Thank y'all so much for tuning into this What If, and thank you to the person who recommended me this What If idea. I really hope you, as well as everyone else, enjoys. As now with that being said, let's get started.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different, man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro, don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do?
Alright, so to begin the What If, we're now going to begin with Izuku's origins. Dating way back, all the way up to his very birthday, as he'll be now recently turning to the age of 8, we will see something very particular happen. Something that ends up changing the course of Izuku's entire story. As on the very same day of his birthday, and right after he turned to the age of 8, we will see that deep within his soul, someone else would then awaken. This being the Dark King himself, the right-hand man to the King of the Pirates. This being Rayleigh. As after many years of laying dormant, his soul would once again reawaken on Izuku's birthday. As right after this awakening, we will then flash towards the next following days. Now during these next following days, we will see Rayleigh as he gets adjusted to his new life. As turning to the very next time we will see him just casually leaning up against a tree, as currently right now he was in school and currently right now it was recess. As we will see Rayleigh just casually leaning up against a tree, being by himself since most of the other kids were focused, playing with the other friends, although Izuku was by himself. Not that it really bothered him currently right now. As Rayleigh would be there watching everyone with a calm expression, this is where we would then see him deep in thought as he begins to really come to terms about what just happened. So to think after so many years I would actually be brought back. This world really is full of mysteries. I bet Captain would be having a blast after hearing this, Rayleigh would think as he shakes his head, before suddenly he would then look up into the sky. Cause you see, by this point now, Rayleigh has come to the terms with the fact that now he's no longer who he used to be. He's no longer the Dark King or the right-hand man to the King of the Pirates. He has fully accepted that that chapter of his life has fully come to an end, as now he's just simply Izuku Midoriya. And when it comes to Izuku, as Rayleigh would go through the old memories he had received from Izuku, as after his soul had been awakened, he immediately was able to gain access to them. This is when Rayleigh would then find out about Izuku's dream. The dream to be a hero similar to that of All Might. And when Rayleigh ends up hearing this, and more precisely when he looks back on that memory, he actually begins to chuckle. Before after going through a couple more and finding out that Izuku was quirkless and basically how this whole society operates. And once Rayleigh was done watching all those memories, this is when suddenly he would then react by just simply laughing at the sheer audacity of what was basically being told to him. As he can't believe the idea that apparently all because Izuku was quirkless that he couldn't become a hero. As after chuckling for a while, this is when suddenly Rayleigh would then respond to it. So who cares? It doesn't matter that you don't got a quirk. You can still become a hero. And more importantly, since I'm going to be around, I might as well help you with that, Rayleigh would say. As by this point now that Rayleigh realized that his old life is no more, and seeing as this is his new life, and also after seeing that Izuku had his own dreams and goal, this is when Rayleigh would then decide to help him out. Because the thing is, Rayleigh already accomplished everything he needed in his old life. He already did all he needed. But you see Izuku had his own dream, his own ambition. And when Rayleigh saw this, he simply wanted to help the kid. Why? Because it would be interesting. After all, in a world that basically tells you that quirkless can't really do anything, a quirkless boy rising up the ranks seemed like a way more interesting story than some guy trying to bring back his old history and legacy. So with those thoughts in mind, this is where we will then see Izuku then get up from the ground before approaching a nearby stick. As he ends up calmly picking up the stick and just swinging it around a couple of times playfully before suddenly gaining a determined and serious look. As with a smirk on his face, this is when suddenly we will then see Izuku swing the stick super hard enough to a point where a generous wind slash would actually be shot out. With this wind slash being so powerful that it ends up rushing directly out of the playground and heading to an unknown location. As right after the attack was released, this is where we would then see the stick then be completely destroyed just from the force of the swing. And not only that, but we also see the teacher looking around as she actually heard it and was worried that something may have happened. As she checked up on all the kids before eventually arriving to Izuku, asking him if he heard anything or if he was okay. To which Izuku ends up calmly turning to her, letting her know that everything was alright and that he didn't hear anything. Now the teacher, seeing that all the kids were okay and after seeing that recess was now over, this is when she would then call them all back into the classroom. As we will see Izuku then head off with the rest of his classmates, all the while a fair distance away we could actually see that in a nearby broken down building, more precisely near the edge of it, we could actually see that a portion of it was actually cut down by Izuku's attack, as this was nothing more but a sheer glimpse of Izuku's potential. As now with this being the final thing that we see from this moment, this is where we're now going to do a time skip. So now flashing forward to the years, after Rayleigh's awakening, we would now see Izuku as throughout those years we would actually see that he had been training in order to achieve his dream for the future. But you see, thanks to both this training as well as Izuku's old life experience that came from Rayleigh, this would actually cause Izuku to gain quite a large amount of respect from his classmates, as Izuku changed from being this quirkless kid that many people can pick on to now a confident guy who was also just honestly a very chill guy to be around. As whenever someone needed help, Izuku would just help them out, or whenever someone needs to talk, Izuku would hear them. Basically, he was just like, that reliable guy that you'd be seeing in class. And this immediately made Izuku popular. Not only that, but he was also the top student of the class, as he would always be there to ace the exams, although his personality would honestly not make you think that he would be a top student, since Izuku is extremely laid back. As due to this personality change, as well as Izuku's newfound popularity, it would actually make him incredibly hard to bully. As you see, the thing is, many people would try to bully Izuku for, being quirkless, but the thing is, thanks to Rayleigh being, all smart and everything and being witty, this would actually transfer over to Izuku, causing him to just simply outsmart all the bullies. And not only that, but like I said, due to him just being such a chill guy and due to him being at the top of the class and being popular, this made bullies, even less likely to actually go after him, with the only person that really just couldn't stop being Bakugo. As throughout those years that went by, Bakugo, he just simply was not able to adjust to the change. He couldn't believe that Izuku was actually turning into someone competent, as it just didn't seem to click with him. As Bakugo would try to firmly, stay and hold on to his belief that Izuku was nothing more but a quirkless Deku, and that he would never change. But you see, something very interesting would actually happen throughout those following years. This being that, although Bakugo did it unintentionally, he actually slowly but surely began to gain respect for Izuku. As although he would still insult Izuku and still sometimes try to pick fights with him, Bakugo could actually see that Izuku was working hard for his future, he was working hard for his achievements. And this would show during the time of gym class or whenever Izuku had free time, as he would always be doing one of three things, this being either working out, studying, or just simply relaxing. It would always be one of those three things, and Bakugo, he actually felt respect for Izuku during this time. And now it didn't really, he didn't really find out about it immediately, but he unintentionally shows respect for Izuku in the way of the fact that whenever Izuku is doing something, he just leaves him alone. If he sees Izuku grinding and stuff like that, he doesn't go out of his way to interfere and just let him be. Although that doesn't mean that he's just suddenly going to be all buddy and just, automatically acknowledge him. Or at least not yet. As now that I'm done explaining all this is where I'm now going to turn to the present. As you'll see Izuku, as this will be his final days of middle school, as he will just be there in the back of the class, all the while the teacher will walk in, talking about their future careers. Now, as soon as he says this is when suddenly he would then toss the papers up in the air, similar to how he does in the main timeline, before exclaiming that he already knows that they all want to become heroes, causing the reactions to ensue as everyone then cheers for it, only for Bakugo to then intervene. As similar to the main timeline, he then begins to go on a whole tangent, explaining how he was going to become the next #1 hero and all that stuff, and that no one else was going to make it, causing everyone to be extremely upset as they all immediately begin to curse him out and boo at him, until the teacher then calls out Izuku, saying that he also has a shot of getting into UA, and this will cause everyone to then stop as they look at him. Now, Izuku was most definitely someone who was very controversial in everyone's eyes, and the main reason why is because of the fact that many people still wonder if it was possible for him to become a hero even though he was quirkless. As Izuku has shown that he most definitely is able to put in the hard work and effort to become one, and not only that, but he is someone who is shown to be very determined to do so, basically proving to everyone that no matter the challenges that come his way, he would try to overcome them. And this would actually cause a very heated debate to be sparked up about his future, as many people debate that, say that he can't become a hero, but he will have a good future down the line that's not hero work. All while some people actually think that Izuku can become a hero, mostly because of the fact that he's very much shown that it didn't really care about what challenges come his way, that he's going to face it head on. So when people ended up hearing about the fact that Izuku gets a chance to go to UA, this caused them to really wonder if he truly has what it takes, if he truly can make it. But you see, while they were all thinking this is when, to everyone's surprise, Bakugo would then leave his desk as he didn't approach Izuku, but he was calm. And more precisely, he had a very serious look on his face, which was opposite to the Bakugo they knew, considering the fact that Bakugo was most likely, most of the time whenever something like this would happen, or whenever Izuku was involved, he was known to just outright react negatively and just immediately begin screaming and ranting, saying stuff about Izuku and just being mean to him. But now Bakugo was behaving like a completely different person. As he approaches Izuku's desk before staring him directly in the eyes, as is when he would then ask Izuku if he was seriously going to try to go into UA. With Izuku not saying nothing more but just simply nodding his head. As Bakugo would continue staring at him for quite a few moments, we were suddenly walking back to his seat, acting as if nothing happened, and then leaving one last response to Izuku, telling him that he better give it all he's got or else he's gonna regret it. With everyone being surprised by Bakugo's response as well as his reaction, as it was completely out of the norm for him, with even the teacher being caught off guard by it, as this is when suddenly the bell would then ring, of course dismissing class and also concluding the rest of the school year. As now with the school year coming to an end, this is where we're now going to have the 6 months training as we see Izuku preparing for the UA entrance exams. Now throughout those months that will go by, we will see that Izuku would spend most of his time just simply training in actual swordsmanship, as we see him actually going to kendo class and stuff like that, and the main reason why is because of the fact that when he ends up going over there, he's actually allowed to wield like kendo sticks and everything. But the thing is, one thing to know is the fact that Izuku is not actually doing this because of the fact he doesn't know how to wield a sword. It's actually more aligned to just simply getting his body used to the motions. Because you see, the thing was, by this point now, Izuku had already had his own sword style, and not only that, but he also had access to haki. As thanks to Rayleigh's old life experience, when it comes to learning haki, Izuku was able to eventually learn it during his earlier years. The only problem was the fact that he didn't have a lot of control like how Rayleigh did in his old life. So that meant that he spent most of the time of the 6 months just simply training his haki in order to gain better control over it. And not only that, but also training when it comes to like kendo and all that stuff, mostly so that way his body can get used to the motions of just like maneuvering his body and everything. As eventually after those 6 months will go by, this is when we will now turn to the UA entrance exams. So now kicking off the beginning portions of it, we will see it remain very similar to that of the main timeline, with the only difference being the fact that Izuku doesn't end up tripping, and not only that, but he just walks in all confident and everything. Oh yeah, and also another thing is the fact that Bakugo isn't really as aggressive towards Izuku, more rather the fact that he's just simply completely silent and just trying to ignore him. As eventually we will see the two of them then walk into the facility, as President Mike begins to explain the rules. As after doing so, this is when we will have the same thing about Ida interrupting, before suddenly he would then turn to Izuku. And unlike in the main timeline where he was just calling out Izuku about his stuttering and all that stuff, muttering and all that stuff, this is when he would then call out Izuku about his attitude and his expression, saying that someone as laid back as Izuku wouldn't actually seem to be a good fit for the hero course, or for even getting into UA. And Izuku's response to all this is just to send him another blank look. As Ida, saying nothing more, would then go back to his seat, as this is when they would then proceed with the portions of facing off against the actual exam robots. Now when they end up arriving to these portions, we will see Izuku as he ends up doing a little bit of stretches while also wielding a kendo stick, as he was permitted to actually bring it. Now everyone else will be there watching Izuku, as many of them begin to point out about the fact that he's bringing a kendo stick, as many people begin to laugh, thinking that was going to be useless against actual robots. This is when suddenly President Mike would then call and announce that the exams had begun. And just like that, in a blink of an eye, while still wielding the kendo stick, this is where we would then see Izuku vanish. As in the very next instance, to everyone's surprise, we will then see 3 robots as they would then be destroyed immediately by Izuku, as he proceeded to do that as if it was nothing while also still wielding the kendo stick. As this would cause them all to be surprised, especially Ida, as he will be there in the back watching all this while being extremely shocked. But how is he able to do that? Earlier in the facility, with such an expression, I thought he would just not take this seriously. Had I been wrong? Ida would think this for a moment before suddenly realizing that the exam was still ongoing, causing him to immediately leap into action as he tries to rack up points. As for the very next few moments, we will then see Izuku as he ends up racking enough points to finally, pass the exams before finally the 0-pointer would then arrive. Now, when the 0-pointer ends up arriving, everyone begins running away, with Izuku also being one of them since he does not want to deal with that. He most definitely can deal with it, but it's more along the lines that he just simply does not want to. But while running away, this is when he would then see Uraraka, as by this point now, she had been fully exhausted due to overusing her quirk, and it will be due to this that she ends up collapsing down to the ground. And when she does, she'll be unaware about the fact that rubble was about to collapse right on top of her. As right as the rubble was about to hit Uraraka, and right as she was about to be trapped, just like she was in the main timeline, this is when, to her surprise, and also Ida, who had been watching, Izuku had been able, in the split instant, to immediately destroy all the rocks, but while also at the same time, picking up Uraraka in one hand and then dashing off. And mind you, he did all this in a split instant, as this will surprise many of the participants there, while also surprising many of the teachers, as mind you, they were all watching this on a big screen, as many of them couldn't believe the fact that that kid had been able to do that in an instant. Wow, that kid is pretty amazing. What exactly is his quirk? One of the teachers would be there asking, with Nezu then chuckling, as by this point now, Nezu had memorized all the students and he knew very much about Izuku Midoriya, and more precisely his particular circumstance. Oh, he doesn't have one, Nezu would say, causing the teacher to look at him in complete surprise, as well as everyone else. Especially All Might, as he can't believe the fact that there was actually someone there that was quirkless that was able to accomplish something such as that. As right after getting that reaction out of the way, this is when they would then turn back to the big screen, as for the next few moments we would then see the Zero Pointer as it continues destroying a bunch of stuff, before finally the entrance exams would then come to an end. As Izuku would then find out later that day that he had been one of the people that had passed. As now that he was done with the UA entrance exams, this is where we're now going to be able to do a time skip, as we're now going to flash forward to the next following days. As turning to the events that end up playing out during this time, we will see that first things first, when Izuku ends up going to UA for the first time and everything, and during the time of the quirk apprehension test, we will see it play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, with the main difference being the fact that Izuku does way better, and not only that, but he does it without, getting injured, as this will cause everyone to realize how powerful Izuku is even though he's quirkless. And also one particular thing to note was the fact that Aizawa, he would be watching all this as he can't help but think in his mind that Izuku's physical abilities was something equal to, if not surpassing, that of Mirio, a third-year student who could compete with the pros. And the reason why Aizawa was thinking like this was the fact that Izuku, throughout the entirety of the test given, was actually breaking multiple records without even trying. All the while Mirio, if he went through the same test, he would actually have to give it quite a bit of effort, and he would actually have to sweat in order to break school records, like he once did it before. So this made Aizawa come to that conclusion, as now with that thought in mind, this is where we will now move on to the next following event, this being the battle trial. As now, turning to the events that end up happening there, we will then see them play out pretty similar, as the outcome of it would remain the same, but how they go about it would be different. So how could I explain this? You see, during the time when All Might would burst into the room, as he ends up explaining that, it was time for them to wear all their hero costumes and also get through with the battles and everything, this would cause everyone to cheer. As when we end up getting a good look of Izuku's, hero costume and everything, we will see him resemble that of a actual samurai, causing everyone to look at him pretty impressed. Even more surprising was the fact that Izuku was actually given a real katana, which caused him to wonder if it really was okay. But then again, at the same time, he was literally in a room with people that could, number one, that can go ahead and make themselves nearly unbreakable, that can cause explosions, that had fire and ice, that had acid. So yeah, him wielding a katana was the least of their worries, as after coming to that realization, they then realized that they can't really complain too much about it. As right after they got into their hero costume, this is when suddenly, of course, they would then be put into teams, with Izuku getting paired up with Uraraka and Bakugo getting paired up with Ida. Now, when Bakugo ends up realizing that he's going to face off against Izuku, he would actually smile, of course, savagely and everything, before suddenly calming down, as this is when suddenly he would then gain a serious look on his face, which ends up causing everyone to look at him very much surprised, considering the fact that earlier on, during the earlier days, Bakugo behaved like how he used to in middle school, but now it was different. As right after getting everything situated, as they didn't wait for their match to begin, this is when suddenly All Might would then tell them to get started, as right after that we would then see them enter inside the building. As we see Izuku and Uraraka as they end up walking throughout the building until eventually they will then be stopped by none other than Bakugo. And when Bakugo is there, instead of outright just simply attacking Izuku, this is when he would then calmly just be there waiting for Uraraka to pass. As Izuku already getting the signs, this is when he would then tell Uraraka to go on ahead, causing her to wonder if he was really going to be okay, to which he tells her that everything was going to be fine. As she ends up doing nothing more but nodding her head before walking past Bakugo, to which he doesn't even respond or really acknowledge her whatsoever. As to him, it was just simply him and Izuku in this room. As this is when Bakugo would then actually begin to discuss with Izuku about everything that's been happening, with him exactly, and more precisely about what's been going on, the reason why he was so serious at this very moment. You see, for the longest time now, Bakugo has been struggling when it came to acknowledging Izuku. As although yes, he has witnessed Izuku's struggles and everything, and not only that, but he does have unintentional respect for Izuku, he was just simply way too hard for him to fully accept Izuku as someone of equal footing. But when it was revealed today that they were going to be doing the battle trials, and that meant that they were going to have the battles and everything, that actually was something that caused Bakugo to feel excited and everything, but not because of the fact that he could just face off against everyone in class, but also because of the fact that that meant that he could face off against Izuku. And that meant that finally Bakugo can put both his as well as Izuku's ideals to the test. As with those thoughts in his mind, this is when suddenly Bakugo would then begin to activate his quirk, popping up a little bit of explosions as he tells Izuku not to hold back. As right here, right now, it was finally time for Bakugo to find out if Izuku was truly worthy of his respect, or if he was truly just a worthless Deku. And when Izuku ends up hearing this is when suddenly he also then puts on a very determined look, as this is when suddenly he would then release his katana, as when he does, this pressure begins to fill up the room, as it makes it very hard for Bakugo to breathe, as we could actually see that the entire building actually begins to shake in Izuku's presence. As Izuku then tells Bakugo that he better not regret it later on, with Bakugo then finally breaking out into much more of his regular habits as he then smiles menacingly, as this is when suddenly he begins to release explosions which grow louder and grow bigger before eventually he would then rush at Izuku, with Izuku doing the same thing. As the two of them would then clash in the middle of the room, with Izuku's katana countering Bakugo's explosion, with their impact causing so much destruction that it destroys the entirety of the floor they were on, causing them to fall down directly to the to the first floor, sorry. As due to their impact and everything, we would actually see on the very top floor, both Uraraka as well as Ida will be panicking as they wonder what exactly was going on. Although All Might, he realized that it may have been a very big mistake to put these two up against each other. As now turning to the other room, after the dust had settled, we will see both Izuku and Bakugo as they were completely fine from their first clash. As in the very next instance, we will then see them rush at each other as they begin to exchange blows. We will see both Bakugo and Izuku as they continue just going at each other, with Bakugo getting multiple cuts on different parts of his body, all while Izuku had been able to evade every last one of Bakugo's explosions, showing Bakugo that he most definitely had the strength to back up all that talk, as well as he most definitely had the strength to actually face him head on. And when Bakugo sees this, he's actually smiling, as after eventually realizing that attacking Izuku close combat was not going to do anything, this is when suddenly Bakugo then decides to get a fair distance away, before suddenly we will then hear two pins drop. And when All Might hears this, his heart will literally sink into his booty cheeks. "Bakugo, don't do it!" All Might would shout, but unfortunately Bakugo was not listening, and in fact neither of them was listening. This was a fight between the both of them. Nothing else mattered right now, as Bakugo had actually released the pins on both of his grenades, as a ginormous explosion would then envelop the first floor, once again shaking up the entirety of the building and honestly making it about to collapse down onto its foundation, literally about to destroy everything that they were literally working on, and not only that, but also almost destroying the bomb itself that Bakugo was supposed to protect and Izuku was supposed to capture. But yet, as they were doing this though, and after Izuku would supposedly get hit by the attack, as everyone looks on in complete horror, this is when, to Bakugo's absolute surprise, by the time that the dust had settled, this is when he would then see Izuku as he remained unscathed. With the one thing to note and the one thing of interest being the fact that Izuku's katana was smoking at this very instance. As Izuku would then let Bakugo know that that was an impressive attack, and that if he actually had not been prepared for it, then that possibly could have killed him. But Bakugo, after hearing this, just snorting out obviously, since he highly doubted that an attack like that could actually kill Izuku. But still nonetheless, Bakugo then realized that he used up his ultimate attack way too early. And not only that, but he also realized that Izuku had not shown off his own ultimate technique just yet. But that didn't really matter to Bakugo, as he didn't care if he had to face it head on, as at the end of the day, this was showing him one thing. This being the fact that, just as he had thought about it, although subconsciously, Izuku was worthy of his respect, and he was now proving it to him. But in order for Izuku to truly full on prove it, was that he needed to fully beat Bakugo in this fight. That meant that either A, Izuku had to knock him out, or B, just had to straight up just kill him, as Bakugo was not going to back down from this fight. As this is when Bakugo then tells Izuku that he better not hold back on this next attack, or he will never forgive him, with Izuku then telling him to bring it on. As in the very next few moments, we will then see Bakugo as he then rushes at Izuku, as he then rushes at him with a ginormous explosion, which causes him a large amount of strain in his arms, not that he really cared about it. Although Izuku, he charges up just one single sword slash. As then Rise Bakugo's explosion was about to hit Izuku head on, this is when suddenly, to his surprise, Izuku would then release the sword slash that was so fast that not even the cameras were able to pick up on it. As Izuku was able to cut through Bakugo's explosion before landing Bakugo with a nasty slash across his chest. And Bakugo, after getting hit by the attack, he would immediately just be sent flying and crashing out of the building as he would be knocked unconscious. But the surprising thing about it was the fact that even after getting knocked unconscious, the last thing Bakugo would have right before getting knocked out of the building would be a ginormous smile on his face. As right after the collision was done and everything, and right after, once again the building was shake from their collision, this is when finally we will then see Izuku as he'll be coming out the victor, with all the way outside of the building with a ginormous slash across his chest being none other than Bakugo. As now that their battle had come to an end, this is when it would then be revealed that Izuku's team had been the winner, as Uraraka had been able to touch the bomb, even though Izuku had destroyed a large portion of the building. So, yeah. As now that they finished their battle trial, this is where we're now going to do a time skip, as we're just going to skim forward a little bit, as you see the rest of the events that play out during this arc play out the exact same way, but there's one very interesting thing to know. As by the time that this arc would come to an end and everything, this is when we would then see that when Izuku ends up seeing Bakugo again, Bakugo, instead of being extremely pissed off, doing the same thing as he does in the main timeline and everything, this is when Bakugo then tells Izuku that the next time he was gonna win. As he just says it with a serious but also a kind of relaxed look on his face, one that you would not really see on someone like Bakugo. And when Izuku sees this, he actually smiles, telling him that he would take him on any time, with Bakugo just chuckling before actually heading off. As this would very much surprise Izuku, but he would actually be proud to see that an old friend of his was actually growing up. All the while, at the same time, as Izuku was about to head home, this is when he would then be approached by both Uraraka and Ida, who want to accompany him. And to his surprise, this is when suddenly Momo, Ojiro, and Toru would then also want to accompany Izuku. Because you see, throughout the entirety of their time at the battle trial, they all felt as if they could have done better with their performance. So after the trial was over, they decided to approach Izuku, seeing as he was someone that, even though he was quirkless, he was still competent, and he was way more useful than them to a certain extent throughout the entirety of their battle trial. So they would ask him for advice about what exactly they can do to improve on their, weakness and everything, with Izuku actually giving them some pretty solid advice. And he would even ask them if they want to train together and everything, to which it would eventually all lead to them training together, forming a group of them. So yeah, Izuku ends up making a pretty big friend group, as we will now move towards the events that end up happening at the USJ, as we now do a time skip. So now, turning to the events that end up happening at the USJ, we will then kick off with the beginning of it, which remains mostly the same all the way until the events of the students arriving at the facility. Now, when they end up arriving there, we will see all of them in their hero costumes and everything, until this is when, after getting introduced to 13 and getting led into the facility, they will then encounter a portal. Now, all the students will wonder if this was part of, the events that were set out for them, only to then be surprised as Aizawa would then tell them that it was not, as he then rushes in to take on the villains. Now, this will cause everyone to realize just how big the stakes are, until suddenly a portal would then open up behind them, as Kodagiri would then arrive. However, as Kodagiri would end up arriving though, this is when, to his surprise, he ends up actually getting a powerful blow directly to the side of his neck, this being from none other than Izuku. As Izuku, thanks to using observation haki, was actually able to find out where exactly was Kodagiri going to come from, as he had been able to predict where he's going to be coming from, as well as where he can land a blow. as after landing this blow, Kodagiri would be stunned for quite a bit due to the power behind it, which ends up giving Ida the opening that he needs to run out there much sooner, as thanks to his quirk as well as thanks to the training that he went with Izuku and his group, this allowed Ida to immediately break out of there much earlier than he did in canon and run out to look for help. As this would cause Kodagiri to immediately be very pissed off as he tells Izuku that he made a big mistake. As Izuku, saying nothing more, would then prepare for any attack, as this is when Kodagiri would then open up a generous portal, as of course Izuku then prepares to counter it. But this is when, right after Izuku was about to counter it, he would then actually use his observation haki to then jump up as a portal will open up underneath his feet. But then to Izuku's disappointment, this is when Kodagiri would then begin to use that portal as if it was a vacuum. As Izuku would curse his luck, as this is when suddenly he would then be sucked into the vacuum, as not only him but also the rest of his classmates would then be separated. As from then on, the events that would happen would actually play out similar to that of the main timeline, as we see Izuku then end up at the shipwreck with both Mineta and Tsuyu. Now luckily in this timeline, we would actually see them actually be able to defeat their group of villains by working together, but the way they do it is actually, pretty amazing, as Izuku then comes up with the idea. As of course, after jumping into the air as Tsuyu would do it, this is when Izuku would then actually use his sword to then cut apart the entirety of the ship, surprising all the villains that were there, as this is when suddenly he would then fall into the water, as of course Mineta seeing this would then immediately begin to throw, his grapes all around, as this is when Izuku, while in the water, would then spin at rapid speeds. Now, of course, the water type villains that were there would then try to, go after him, only to be surprised as Izuku then turns his swings like underneath the water into like a generous whirlpool, as that was the reason why he was spinning so fast while swinging the blade. As this would cause this generous whirlpool, which mind you, this caused him to not only be stuck in with, Mineta, like the grapes and everything, but also with like a generous amount of ship rubble, causing many of the villains to be heavily damaged, as well as the fact that they will be captured as well. As Izuku had been able to come up with a plan like this while on short notice. As eventually, after finally completing the whirlpool and after seeing that all the villains were defeated, this is where we would then see Izuku as he ended up jumping out of there with not too much trouble actually, surprising Tsuyu and Mineta as they had been the first ones to make it onto dry land, as they thought they would need to actually save Izuku, only to see that he got out of there pretty easily. With Tsuyu asking Izuku how he's able to do that, with Izuku just simply telling her that he enjoys swimming, which makes no sense since he literally jumped out of a whirlpool, but at the end of the day, they had no time to really discuss about how he did it. To which, if you guys want to know, it's basically similar to how the Roku Shiki and all that stuff. Izuku's already able to like immediately kick the ground like 10 times and then just immediately jump out of there. So if you guys wondering how he did it, there. So right after they had gone out of the whirlpool and after defeating their group of villains, this is where we would then see them as they try to regroup with their classmates. But while on the way there, this is when Izuku would then realize that a bunch of villains were actually paying attention to them and were trying to chase after them. As Izuku then tells Mineta and as well as Tsuyu to go on ahead, as he stays behind to face off against the villains. Now, of course, Mineta and Tsuyu did not want to leave him, but unfortunately they had no time to waste, as they would then rush over to the rest of their classmates, all the while Izuku would stay behind. As for the next following moments, by the time that both Tsuyu as well as Mineta had finally arrived back to their classmates, we would actually see that turning to Izuku, he had been able to somehow, some way, defeat the entirety group of villains that were there, a large portion of them in fact, while the rest of them that was a fair distance away would look on in complete terror as they wonder what the heck just happened. As doing a little bit of a cutscene as well as a flashback, we could actually see that when both Tsuyu as well as Mineta had ran away and left Izuku by himself, and as the villains were rushing at him, this is when suddenly Izuku would then release a pressure. As this pressure was so powerful, they actually was able to knock out all the villains before they even had a chance of actually being able to touch Izuku. And this will surprise many of them as more of them would begin to rush after him in waves, as Izuku will be doing this over and over again. But you see, to their surprise, by the time that Izuku had defeated a large portion of them, instead of feeling happy or satisfied, Izuku would actually have a look of disappointment. Well, that just sucks. I'm only able to knock out this many? I really need to train with this a little bit more, Izuku would say, as the ability he had been using during the time to, knock out all these villains was none other than Conqueror's Haki. As this was a skill that Izuku had learned throughout the time of his training and everything, the only problem and the only real thing that Izuku had a problem with was the fact that, once again, he's not able to use it as he once did in his old life. But still, nonetheless, it was, at least it was useful and helpful in the situation, as these villains just simply are not able to match up to the pressure. All the while, the rest of them that were there will be looking at Izuku with pure terror, as they wonder if maybe he was an unknown hero that was, secretly pretending to be a student and everything in order to catch them off guard, as they can't help but wonder why Shigaraki didn't plan for this. But you see, while Izuku was, there like continuously knocking them down and just, defeating a large portion of villains, this is when suddenly he would then encounter the leaders behind the attack. Or more precisely, he will see the scene of Aizawa getting beaten up by the Nomu. And when Izuku sees this is when suddenly he will then have a very serious look on his face, as Izuku then begins to approach Shigaraki and the rest of the leaders, this being Kodagiri as well as Nomu. Now when he's approaching, this is when other villains begin to see him as they rush at him, only to be knocked out by the Conqueror's Haki, as this Haki begins to grow more and more noticeable as the pressure begins to fill in. Now this will cause both Shigaraki as well as Kodagiri to then turn their attention onto Izuku, as Izuku continues approaching them with a menacing aura behind him, as this pressure begins to feel so dangerous enough to a point where Shigaraki begins to actually, scratch himself fiercely, as this is when he would then tell Nomu to take care of the brat, as his presence is so-called annoying. As the Nomu, then taking his attention away from Aizawa, would then turn his attention onto Izuku before rushing at him, as he would then throw a maximum punch directly towards him, only to then be surprised along with the rest of the villains there, and especially Shigaraki, as Izuku has somehow, someway, have been able to stop the Nomu's attack by simply using his thumb. As Izuku will be just there looking at the Nomu, as by this point now, like his hair was covering his eyes as there was like a shade over it, as this is when Izuku will then suddenly draw his blade. As in the very next second, this is when suddenly a sword slash would then be heard, as it would hit the Nomu straight on. And to many people's surprise that were watching, the sword slash that was super powerful didn't seem to do really too much damage to Nomu. As Shigaraki seeing this, then begins to laugh as he tells Izuku that there's no way that flimsy sword could do any damage to his precious Nomu, only to then be surprised, as this is when suddenly the Nomu's body begins to slide, as more precisely like the top part of his body begins to slide off of the bottom one, before suddenly beginning to get inflated by some type of kinetic energy, as this is when the Nomu would then pop away, as many people would look on in pure shock as this pop would shake up the entirety of the facility, as everyone watching will look on in complete shock as he couldn't believe that Izuku had been able to defeat such a fierce opponent in one attack. All the while Kodagiri and Shigaraki, they would just be there, as Shigaraki by this point, he is scratching quite a lot as this was not supposed to happen. This was not a part of the plan, as he tries to make sense about what happened, with Izuku then letting him know that if he did this to their Nomu, which he had suspected was the strongest one out of all of them, then the real question was, what was going to happen if he hit them with his sword? As Izuku then points the katana menacingly at Shigaraki as he prepares to make his move. If Shigaraki seeing this, feeling his life at risk, this is when he would then order Kodagiri to take them out of there, as he didn't even care that he was going to abandon a large portion of their allies, with Kodagiri immediately listening to Shigaraki's request as he opens a portal trying to teleport Shigaraki out of there, only for Izuku to then appear, as Izuku would be right there about to slash Shigaraki, only for luckily Shigaraki to get away, as he had got out of there in the nick of time. Although Izuku was able to draw blood, as he had been able to actually cut Shigaraki enough to a point where there will be a small slash mark next to his chest and everything. As after seeing that he at least was able to do damage and was able to get the leaders to run away, that meant that this arc would actually come to an end, with the police as well as the rest of the heroes finally arriving, as they would take away the rest of the villains that were there, taking them away for questioning and everything, all the while the students will be checked on to see if they were okay, with Izuku being revealed to be a-okay even after defeating large portions of villains, and not only that, but after one-shotting the Nomu. And not only that, but we also see that Izuku will be taken in for questioning as well, in order to find out exactly, what happened and everything that he went through. So we will now do a time skip, as we will now move past the events that happened at the USJ, as we now move towards the UA Sports Festival. So now flashing forward to the next following days after the events that happened at the USJ, we will now see Class 1A once again, as by this point now they were finally getting back to their regular schedule, as after discussing everything that they knew with the, law enforcement and everything, they were finally able to return back to class. Now when they end up returning back, they end up seeing Aizawa once again, as due to Izuku interfering in the USJ, this allowed Aizawa to actually get away without getting too injured, as the most that he had was his arm in a sling, but other than that he was able to teach the class normally. As then after seeing that all the students were here now, this is where he would then begin teaching them, as well as then announcing to them about the UA Sports Festival, as we're now going to be skimming forward a little bit. As you see, the beginning would remain mostly the same, with there only being a couple of differences. This being the fact that during the beginning, Izuku and his group, although they did train together and everything in preparation for the, for the sports festival, this is when halfway throughout those points, we would actually see them separate for a little bit, and it was mostly due to the fact that the others want to have a trick up their sleeves in order to surprise Izuku, and also to make him, take them more seriously, since out of all of them so far, like out of his entire friend group, Izuku was actually the most powerful one, even though he was quirkless. But still nonetheless, after the following weeks would be over, this is when we will then have the events of the UA Sports Festival then kicking off, as this is where we would then see Izuku, as during the beginning portions of the sports festival, we will see Izuku actually gaining first place, and he'll be maintaining it with little difficulty. As when it comes to the challenges and obstacle course and all that stuff, Izuku is easily able to use his mind to immediately get out of the way of the obstacles, or just simply power through them. As this caused many people to be very much surprised, especially when they heard that Izuku was quirkless, but still was one of the top students. As Izuku will be doing everything in his power to maintain first place, until eventually it will be finally time for the 1v1 fights. And for those wondering exactly what went down during the cavalry battle, unfortunately not too much, as Izuku still had a pretty solid team, and due to his intelligence, plus with Hatsume, Uraraka, and Tokiyami helping him out, Izuku was actually able to pass this portion relatively easily. So, and not only that, but he didn't get his headband stolen like he did in the main timeline. So that meant that he was able to maintain first place all the way up until the 1v1 fights. Now for the 1v1 fights, we will see Izuku as he'll be facing off against Shinso, and I'm not gonna lie to you, this fight would be going by relatively quickly, as Izuku is just simply able to push him out of the arena like it was nothing. As this would happen so fast enough to the point where Shinso wasn't really able to get any reaction out of Izuku, and Izuku didn't even answer his questions or really do anything like that. As Shinso will be taken down so easily, as everyone else in the crowd actually felt very much disappointed with the fight. And Shinso would be there seeing all this and feeling very much frustrated and annoyed, as he would be walking away, as he can't help but curse his luck. As if he just had a normal quirk and one that was more meant for combat, then this wouldn't happen. But as he was walking away though, this is when suddenly Izuku would then call out to him, as Shinso would then turn to him with a glare asking him what he wants. As he begins to think that Izuku was going to taunt him and just be rude to him, only to be surprised that Izuku would then actually try to reach out to shake his hand, saying that was a good fight. And when Shinso hears this, he immediately begins to grow angry, doing the whole typical emotional spiel, like slapping Izuku's hand out of the way, as he tells Izuku that there wasn't even a fight, and that he lost without even being able to land one single punch. With Izuku trying to tell Shinso that only meant that he needed to train more. And when Shinso hears this, he grows even angrier, as he tells Izuku that he has no idea about the struggle and everything, with Izuku telling him that, trying to remind Shinso that he was quirkless. But yet Shinso tries to argue, saying that he has no idea about how it's like to be judged for his quirk and everything, as this is when Shinso would then reveal about his, brainwashing quirk. And when Izuku hears this, he's actually very much impressed by it, as he tells Shinso that's a pretty cool idea and everything, with Shinso being surprised. As he begins to ask Izuku questions about whether or not he would be afraid of his ability and everything, with Izuku telling him that he's not afraid about Shinso's brainwashing quirk. As Shinso would be there just completely amazed, as this is when Izuku would then give Shinso some pretty solid advice. As after giving him advice as well as offering him an opportunity to train with his group after this event is over, this is when he would then walk away. With Shinso just looking at him with a daze as he wonders who exactly was Izuku Midoriya, and more precisely, just how was he able to do that. As Izuku was able to do all that with a calm and mature expression, one that you would not see from, other people of his age. As Shinso wonders about whether or not he should join Izuku's group for the training and everything, as this is when he would then walk back to the stands as we would then continue on with the rest of the fights. Now turning to the next fights, as we end up seeing them all go by just like they do in the main timeline, this is where we actually see something very particular, this being the fact that Uraraka does very well against Bakugo, enough to the point where she actually ends up landing a pretty nasty blow next to his shoulder, as this ends up causing Bakugo to have a much harder time against her, but he is still able to beat Uraraka nonetheless. As although she is most definitely stronger than she was in the main timeline, unfortunately she would not be able to beat Bakugo, as she was not the only one that was training. Bakugo was doing the same thing. as he had been able to defeat Uraraka, but still nonetheless, he was impressed by her strength. As he would then walk back to, the waiting room and everything, preparing for the next fight. All the while, Izuku's fight would then be up next, as he'll be facing off against none other than Todoroki. As we now end up flashing forward to the events that happened there. So when it comes to the events that happen with Todoroki and everything, when it comes to their match, or more precisely before their match, we see things playing out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, with Todoroki actually talking to Izuku and basically just telling him about, him wanting to beat him with only using his eyes and everything, with Izuku after hearing this saying nothing more, as after all that was his choice, that was Todoroki's choice, he was not going to influence it. But later on, eventually, after Izuku would be trying to leave and everything, this is when he would then encounter Endeavor. And the encounter with Endeavor actually goes very different compared to that of the main timeline, as Izuku, instead of having Endeavor just be there, as he tells Izuku to basically make Todoroki look better, this is when Izuku would then tell Endeavor straight to his face that he's not exactly one to influence the life of his children, saying that they need to make their own decisions and everything, as Rayleigh would actually share some experience from his old life. As after giving this advice to Endeavor, this is when Izuku would then head off, as Endeavor would just be there wondering how the heck did a child actually know so much, as he would be staring at Izuku feeling very confused and also feeling a little bit threatened, considering the fact that not once had Izuku even flinched at being in his presence, which most people did considering the fact that the man was literally constantly on fire almost 24/7. But now that I'm done explaining the events that happened before the fight, this is where we will now turn to it. As turning to the fight, we will see both Izuku and Todoroki as they then prepare for their match, as Midnight will be there watching as both of them are, fully prepared and everything. As once they are, this is when she will then call the match to begin. Now, one interesting thing to know about this fight is the fact that Izuku doesn't have a sword. And not only that, but he doesn't even have a kendo stick. So when Todoroki sees this, he thinks that he's going to have a much higher chance of winning, as this is when he would then release his ice, as he expects Izuku not to be able to do anything, only to be surprised, as Izuku is easily able to avoid his ice before suddenly appearing right in front of him and landing him with a gut punch, with this punch carrying so much force that it literally knocks the wind out of Todoroki's lungs. But right before he can really get a chance to catch his breath, this is when suddenly Izuku would then elbow him in the neck, causing Todoroki to hit the ground hard, as this would happen so fast that everyone there watching would literally not be able to see the entire thing happen. It was just 1 second Izuku was there, and the next second he was gone, beating the crap out of Todoroki. Now Todoroki eventually, after being able to catch his balance and everything, and after recovering from the beating, this is when he would then try facing off against Izuku with pure hand-to-hand combat, which was a bad idea, as Izuku is literally dog-walking Todoroki as this man is getting tossed around the entirety of the arena, with everyone just watching this in complete shock, considering the fact that this was the son of the number 2 hero. And Endeavor watching this, he'll be extremely pissed off, as he knows that Todoroki could actually stop this if he had just simply used his fire. But it seems as if he'd much rather take the beating rather than trying to use his own quirk. As this would go on for quite a few moments, as Todoroki would then shakily get up once again, as we can actually see by this point now he has taken quite a large amount of damage, and it looked as if he was barely able to stand. As this is when Todoroki would then mutter, even though he seemed very tired, that he won't use his fire. I won't resort to it, no matter what, and you won't force me, Todoroki would say, as this is when suddenly he would then begin to use his ice to make a ginormous glacier actually appear right in the middle of the arena, causing everyone to be surprised as Izuku would supposedly get hit by the attack. But you see, as Izuku was encased in the ice and everything, and right as it seemed as if he, finally was able to get caught off guard, this is when, to Todoroki's surprise as well as everyone, cracks begins to form in the glacier, as this is when suddenly the entire glacier would actually be destroyed by Izuku. As using his abilities, or more precisely his haki, Izuku is actually able to break out of the ice as if it was nothing, as he'll be just stretching and shaking it off almost as if he literally took nothing more but a cold shower. As Izuku then looks at Todoroki with a look of disappointment before suddenly rushing at him and once again just beating the crap out of him. And Todoroki, after of course seeing this, he realizes that he's just not going to be able to win against him. As after Izuku would send him flying one more time, this is when he would then actually speak to Todoroki, saying that he doesn't really have any cares for his ideals and everything, but this is when he would then tell Izuku that he should quit the hero course, saying that if he was this petty and if he was this unwilling to use his quirk, then what was he going to actually do when someone was in danger and they needed his fire? as this caused Todoroki's eyes to then widen, as this is when he would then try to put up an argument as he thinks that Izuku was working for his father, only to then be surprised as Izuku would then appear right in front of Todoroki and then slap him hard in the face, with this slap actually causing Todoroki to once again be sent flying, as he would just be there like rolling for a little bit before staring up into the sky. As this is when Izuku would then tell Todoroki that he doesn't care about his family situation and that he doesn't care about what was going on. Since the thing is, when it comes to, well, life in general, everyone has their own share of trauma and struggles, but they don't make it onto, like, they don't show it in full display, as basically everyone has to go ahead and grow up and just continue pushing. And if Todoroki doesn't want to do that, then Izuku's not going to help him, since after all, that's not his job right now. His job was to simply win this fight and move on. And as soon as Izuku says this, it kind of clicked with Todoroki that honestly he was doing a little bit much. And not only that, but also what Izuku said earlier on about someone needing his fire, Izuku never really thought of it that way. As this is when he then comes to that realization about how selfish he was being, as right as Izuku was about to rush at him once again to finish the fight, this is when Todoroki would then release a generous stream of fire, as this fire would actually cause Izuku to back off for a little bit, as Todoroki then begins to power up, telling Izuku that he was going to regret making him resort to this, with Izuku not saying anything else but actually smirking for the very first time throughout this entire match. As the entirety of this match, Izuku was just purely serious. He didn't even crack a smile. So this was the very first time it was happening during this entire time. And Endeavor, when he sees Todoroki uses his fire, he's of course cheering and everything, but Todoroki wasn't paying attention to him. As like Izuku said, all that was important right now was this match, nothing more, nothing less. As with that, this is where we will then see Todoroki as he then charges up, as by this point now he thinks that he could actually win against Izuku, since Izuku didn't have his sword with him. As this is when he would then release a stream of flames, as well as combining it with his ice as well, as both of them will be side by side, with the flames not melting the ice, and the ice, not extinguishing the flames. As it did take a large amount of control, but still nonetheless, Todoroki was able to pull it off, as both of these elemental attacks would then rush at Izuku, with Izuku, after seeing these elemental attacks rushing him, not doing nothing more but actually smirking, as this is when he then charges right through them, like he actually does a spear tackle right through them, causing everyone to look at him as if he was insane, especially Todoroki as well, since he actually thinks that he may have finished him off, and by that I mean he actually thinks that he killed him, only to then be surprised, as literally, even after getting like engulfed in flames and in ice, Izuku is able to literally spear his way through it all, and actually be able to land another punch directly into the gut of Todoroki, now fully sending him out of the arena and crashing into a nearby wall. As somehow, even with the odds stacked against him, and even though he has been severely nerfed without his weapon, Izuku was still able to win the fight. As Todoroki will be seen once again as he'll be looking at Izuku in complete shock, only to then suddenly release a smile as he thanks Izuku before suddenly, falling into unconsciousness, as Izuku says nothing more before suddenly raising his fist up into the air, as this is when he will then be declared the winner. Now, when it comes to Izuku's injuries during the fight, he didn't really have any injuries besides the fact that his clothes were pretty damaged. I mean, after all, the guy literally spear tackled his way through both flames and ice. But still nonetheless, Izuku was fine in general, enough to the point where he was finally ready for his final match, this being his match against none other than Bakugo, the rematch that they've been waiting for. Now, when it comes to their rematch, we will then see both Izuku and Bakugo as they will make their way to the arena after, they finally were able to, remove Todoroki and fix up all the damage. As when they both end up staring at each other, we actually see that both of them are quite serious, with Bakugo not taunting or doing anything of that, as to him he was taking this seriously, as he tells Izuku that it was finally time for him to get that, rematch that he's been waiting for, with Izuku telling him to bring it on. As right after that quick exchange of words, this is where we will then see the two of them as they will begin their fight. As this is where we will see Bakugo as he rushes at Izuku, with Izuku doing the same thing, as they will then rush to the very middle of the arena before clashing with an explosion, as well as Izuku just, throwing a punch, with somehow, someway him not getting affected by the explosion, as both of them would cause so much damage enough to the point where the arena was once again broken, but not enough, not as bad as the last fight at least. As everyone will be watching this as the two of them just begin to go blow for blow, as Bakugo was most definitely feeling the pain in his arms, as every last one of Izuku's hit literally rippled throughout his muscles and literally shook him to the very bone. But yet, even after feeling this pain, he would just continue on throwing punches, with Izuku doing the same thing. As the two of them would go blow for a while, this is when they would then separate, as Bakugo then releases a ginormous explosion, one that would normally cause him a large amount of pain from it, around his arms. But this time, it didn't really do too much because of the fact that he's been training. As when Izuku sees the large wave of explosions coming his way, this is when he would then jump up into the air. And to the surprise of everyone, when Izuku jumps up into the air, he just simply stays there. As somehow, someway, he was actually flying. Or at least that's what people think. In actuality, Izuku was doing nothing more but using one of the Rokushiki techniques, this being the moonwalk, or Ginpo if you guys are, sub-watchers. As when Izuku does this, we can see Bakugo being caught off guard before suddenly smirking, as this is when he then tells Izuku that if they're going to find the air, then he's perfectly fine with it, as using his explosions, he would then fly up to Izuku before trying to slam him with an explosion hard into his face, only for Izuku to then dodge out of the way. As maneuvering into the air, this is where we would then see something very amazing, as if you guys want a reference, think of it as when Lee fought Gaara, as we see Bakugo as he tries to keep up with Izuku's speed, but unfortunately he couldn't, as Izuku is literally throwing Bakugo across the entirety of the arena while still being in the air, as we see Izuku disappear and appear from different places and hitting Bakugo in different areas. But eventually, after Izuku was done with his barrages of attacks, this is when we will then see Bakugo as he'll be now falling to the ground, as Izuku will be there waiting for him to, finally hit the ground and end the fight. Only to then be surprised as Bakugo would then be revealed to be conscious, as this is when he then begins to spin like a drill, as he releases his ultimate technique, this being the Howwindsor Impact, as he would then rush at Izuku trying to, finish him off, with Izuku seeing this and actually smiling, before suddenly rushing at the attack head on, as this will cause everyone to look on in complete shock, with both Midnight as well as Cementos trying to put a stop to the fight, but unfortunately they couldn't. As we will then see both of them then clash with each other, with Izuku just throwing a simple punch, all the while Bakugo will use his ultimate technique, as both attacks would collide, causing even more massive damage across the entirety of the arena, as well as not even just the arena, also the stadium in general, as Cementos had no choice but to make a barrier in order to protect the people that were there. But even the barrier was barely being able to withstand the blow. As after the attack would finally come to an end, and after both Izuku as well as Bakugo were finally separated, this is where we would then finally see the victor. As although Bakugo did try his best with that final technique, unfortunately it still wasn't enough. As Izuku would then be revealed the winner, but to everyone's surprise, and more precisely to Izuku's surprise, he actually got pretty injured on that one, considering the fact that Izuku wasn't exactly a full master yet, when it comes to hockey at least. Like, his hockey level was not that under equal levels of Rayleigh, as he had to use quite a bit, plus mind you he didn't have like a kendo stick or anything to channel his hockey through. So that meant that Izuku did take quite a bit of damage in his arm, but other than that he was a-okay. And as for Bakugo, well, he most definitely felt that blow, as we could actually see him on the ground bleeding by quite a lot. As fortunately, due to having medical staff on standby, he would still be able to live, but if they weren't there, he probably wouldn't have made it. As after the fight had come to an end, this is when Midnight would then walk towards Izuku before scolding him about taking things way too far and for flying off the handle. But after seeing that, other than getting his arm pretty badly injured and all that stuff, that he was okay, this is when she would then announce Izuku as the winner of the sports festival, causing everyone to cheer at the amazing display. As after that, this is where we would then see the final conclusions of it. As flashing forward, we will then see Izuku as he gains the first place medal, with Bakugo gaining the second place medal, and Tokoyami getting the third place medal. I don't know if you guys knew this, but Tokoyami actually did really good, and he got third place, in the main timeline. So, and here it would still be the same thing, since unfortunately Todoroki got knocked out, and he was now currently in fourth place. But still, nonetheless, he did an amazing performance. As now with the sports festival coming to an end, this is where we can now flash forward with the story once again, as we now move forward. So now flashing forward to a couple of days after the events that went down at the sports festival, as we now end up seeing a couple of things go down. Number one being the fact that Bakugo finally gets out of recovery and everything after his fight against Izuku, and when he's out, instead of getting upset over the results, this is when he's actually feeling quite excited, as that fight was exactly what Bakugo had wanted, as both him and Izuku kind of gave it all they got, or at least that's what Bakugo thinks, as due to their collision and everything, this made Bakugo very much excited for their next fight, as he wonders how much stronger they're going to be, as well as how much damage they were going to be causing to surrounding areas. As basically Bakugo was entering into his Kenpachi arc, where he's crazy for battle and everything like that. And also meanwhile, during this time, we actually see them as they then prepare for the hero internship, which I'm going to be skimming forward with this since Izuku doesn't play too much of a role here, as during the hero killer arc, this arc is going to be skimmed forward because of the fact that, number one, Stain does end up being captured, but it's not by Izuku and his friends. Rather, it's going to be done by Endeavor. As early during this arc, Izuku did find out about what happened to Ida's brother, and during this time, Ida would actually surprisingly ask Izuku for help about what he should do and everything, because of the fact that Ida has acknowledged that Izuku was quite mature for his age and someone who can give good advice, with Izuku basically telling Ida not to go through with it since it was not worth it. Much rather than that, we'd actually see that Izuku and his friend group during this time, they would actually, be spending time training with each other while also going off to do their own internships. Which, if you guys are wondering what Izuku does for his internship, he actually internships with Nezu, since honestly both of them are kind of on the same Wi-Fi here because of the fact they like to relax and everything, but also because of the fact that both of them will be giving each other interesting ideas. As thanks to Rayleigh's old life experience, he'll be able to have a pretty fascinating conversation with Nezu liking the way that Izuku, or should I say Rayleigh, thinks. And also during this time, as Izuku will be doing all this, we actually see more inclusions to Izuku group when it comes to training. This being that, number one, Shinso actually ends up joining them. As after deciding to take Izuku on his offer and going to join them when it comes to training, Shinso would be making quite a large amount of improvements, as he would actually be able to fight without, having to resort to using his quirk, so that meant that he wasn't completely helpless without it. And not only that, but he was actually making some pretty good connections with the rest of Class 1A, as he had actually became friends with Uraraka, Ida, Momo, Ojiro, and Toru. And he was not the only one to join their group. We also see that Todoroki and Tokuyami had eventually also ended up joining, mostly because of the fact that they saw just how good the training was doing for Izuku, as he had been able to win the entirety of the sports festival without even wielding a weapon. He was severely nerfed, yet he still came out on top. So if that doesn't show that his training is quite useful, then I don't know what is. So yeah, still nonetheless, Izuku's group would continue on to grow, as all of them were making quite a large amount of improvement, both physically as well as mentally as well, since this actually allowed many of them to get out of their shells and actually develop more as people, becoming more mature and just more open to ideas. As this will go on for the entirety of the hero internship, before eventually we will then turn to the final exams arc. Now for this arc, we're going to be seeing many differences play out here, but the outcome of it would remain mostly the same. This being that, number one, during the time when all the students will return back and be reintroduced to each other, this is when, to their surprise, that throughout this time Shinso had actually officially joined into Class 1A. As due to Izuku's training as well as thanks to his internship with Aizawa, Shinso was finally able to gain enough clearance enough to the point where he officially joined Class 1A, which this ended up causing Izuku as well as the rest of his friend group to be quite happy about it. And also during this time, as we see Shinso then be added to the class and everything, this is when we would then see them as they would then prepare to face off against their teachers, with Izuku and Bakugo being shown to face off against All Might. Now for the events that play out during this portion, we would actually see them play out quite differently. As when Izuku as well as Bakugo found out that they were going to face off against All Might, to Izuku's surprise, instead of Bakugo trying to argue with him, instead Bakugo was actually quite open to the idea of both of them trying to take on All Might. But he does end up saying that he does first want them to actually have a 1v1 when it comes to, their encounter with him. So whoever encounters him first gets to have a 1v1, and then the next person can have a 1v1, before they eventually will have to jump him. Now Izuku ends up agreeing to these terms, and if you guys are wondering why exactly Bakugo is okay with working with Izuku and everything, it's because of the fact that Izuku actually showed Bakugo that he was worthy of his respect. He showed it in the battle trial, and he showed it again in the in the UA Sports Festival. As these events are actually very crucial to Bakugo's development right now, as he sees Izuku in a new light. But that is not to say that he's just going to immediately admit that Izuku is going to become the #1 hero or anything, since Bakugo was still trying to reach that goal. But still nonetheless, we will then turn to the fight between Izuku and Bakugo facing off against All Might, as we see them enter inside the city that was abandoned so far, until suddenly a ginormous wind blast will then be sent their way. Now mind you, both of them are in hero costumes, so they're easily able to counter the attack, with Bakugo using his explosions and Izuku just sending out a sword slash, as they're able to resist the pressure of it enough to the point where it finally dies down. But once they were done doing this though, this is when All Might would then make his appearance known, as he compliments both boys for resisting the attack, as this is when suddenly Bakugo would then rush at him first, saying that he's got dibs since he saw him first. Now when Bakugo faces off against All Might, no matter how much more powerful this Bakugo is compared to the one in the main timeline, unfortunately he's still not going to be able to beat All Might, as All Might, even though he was drastically holding back, he was still able to beat down against Bakugo, with the only real thing being the fact that Bakugo is able to cause quite a bit of damage, surprising All Might since after all they were still students. But as All Might was done, like, sending Bakugo flying and everything, this is when he would then turn his attention onto Izuku, only to then bring his hand up to actually block out of a way of a non-lethal sword slash, with the second that the sword collided with All Might actually causing the number 1 hero to be pushed back quite a bit, causing him to be surprised. What the? That freaking attack cost me so much energy. What the heck type of strength does this kid have? But right before All Might could really question it though, this is when suddenly Izuku would then rush at him once again, as this is when he would then begin to launch a generous amount of sword slashes directly at All Might, with All Might being able to block some of them, but to his surprise he would actually begin to get cut on different areas, with these being only small miniature cuts, nothing lethal of course. As All Might seeing this then realized that he's gonna have to take this way more seriously, as this is when suddenly he would then throw a punch directly at Izuku, with Izuku blocking it with his katana, with the collision between these two actually causing a generous shockwave, as Izuku would then be pushed back, with All Might of course being surprised by the fact that he's easily able to tank it, and more surprised by the fact that that katana was not broken by the hit. Just what type of durability did they put into that blade? It's abnormal. And this kid is quirkless too? No, something's not right here, All Might would think, as there was just simply no way. There was no way in this entire universe that that kid could actually be considered quirkless. With everything that he's been doing, there's just simply, it made no sense. He was able to block an attack from the number 1 hero, even though he was holding back. I mean, the other kid literally tried doing the same thing and he got sent flying. So as All Might tries to rationalize about what exactly is Izuku's ability and everything, and why he's able to do everything, this is when Izuku would then suddenly appear right in front of him once again, sending out a sword slash to which All Might is just barely able to dodge out of the way, before suddenly he would then be hit in the side, which, the area where he is most vulnerable, causing him to then cough up a little bit of blood as he then gets sent flying. With this moment being registered in Izuku's mind as he finally finds out exactly where All Might is most vulnerable. But the thing was, when he ends up seeing that reaction and everything, he decided not to go after it anymore because of the fact that already after taking that blow, All Might will be seen once again as he'll be taking very heavy breaths, as it seems as if he was enduring a large amount of pain. As Izuku then vows to not hit him like that again, considering the fact that, it just didn't seem fair. As this is when, as All Might after finally recovering from the blow, this is when he would then rush at Izuku once again, as he tries to gut punch him, to which, to his surprise, the attack would actually land. But in an even more shocking turn of events, even after getting hit by the attack, Izuku will be able to tank it. As even though he will be sent flying and crashing and everything, Izuku would then be revealed to be just fine as he just shakes off the dust that fell on his stomach, as well as shaking off the rubble and all that stuff, as he had actually used Haki to reinforce his gut, so that way he didn't, take too much damage from it. Now, by this point now, after seeing that Izuku was a fair distance away, this is when All Might would then have a breather, only for Bakugo to then intervene, and then later on Izuku, as now both of them were jumping him. And unfortunately for All Might, due to getting continuously attacked from all sides, and due to him just simply blocking and trying to get away, this gave Izuku and Bakugo a clear opening for the exit, as they would end up reaching there using their immense speed, and also causing All Might to be caught off guard by it, as this is when they would then both pass with relative ease. As this would end up putting an end to their final exams test, as we end up not seeing just them but also everyone else passing as well, except for those that didn't pass in the main timeline. And one interesting thing to know was the fact that everyone that was a part of Izuku's friend group, they all did way better than they did in the main timeline, as they all showed exactly how much they had grown, plus also from the training that they were doing and also from their internships. So there was that. As now that we're done with the final exams, this is where we will now maneuver into the forest training camp, as we will now turn to it starting now. So kicking off the events that ended up happening for the forest training camp, we see them start off with the students now finally finishing their final exams arc, now going to the camp by using a bus obviously. As when they first arrived there, we will see the beginning of it kick off relatively similar to the main timeline, as the students would have to face off against they have to go through the forest facing off against different earth type monsters and everything like that, but luckily they were able to get through it relatively easily. And then soon afterwards, we will then see them enjoy the camp for itself, training and, having a barbecue. They'll be enjoying themselves, having a good time. But it's only during the mid and later sections of this arc that we see things play out differently, as it will be during the time when the villains would actually attack. As we see Izuku during this point, as he'll be currently walking through the forest with Shinso, as Shinso, due to him being part of Class 1A, that meant that Izuku actually had a teammate for doing the trials that were given to them for the forest training camp. But you see, while they were making their way through and everything, this is when suddenly Izuku would then hear a scream, as this is when he would then dash off within amazing speeds, with Shinso trying to keep up with him but failing very badly. As even after all that training, Izuku was showing as to why exactly he was the strongest one out of all of them. As after zipping throughout the forest, this is when Izuku would then arrive to see the scene right in front of him, as he will see Koda currently being held up into the air by Muscular, as he'll be there threatening Koda's life, as he ends up saying that he's going to make Koda experience the same thing that his parents felt, which was, death by his hands. And Koda hearing this, he would immediately tear up, as he begins to recall his parents and everything, but right before Muscular really gets a chance to do anything harmful to him, this is when his arm would actually be snapped in a very weird way, as Koda would then fall into the ground, as he would then be caught by someone in the very last second. As when Koda ends up looking up, this is when he would then see none other than Izuku, as somehow, someway, Izuku in a very split instant had been able to not only free Koda from Muscular's grasp, but also legit cut his, literally break his arm in a very weird way. As Muscular would be reeling back from the pain before suddenly turning his eyes to Izuku, telling him that he was going to actually pay for that, with Izuku saying nothing more as he puts Koda on the ground and telling Muscular that he's going to make him feel a generous amount of pain. Now Muscular hearing this then chuckles, as using his quirk, he begins to make himself more buff and everything, as this is when he would then rush at Izuku, trying to throw a punch only for Izuku to then dodge out of the way calmly. As in the very next second, this is when suddenly Izuku would then suddenly barrage Muscular with a bunch of finger pistols basically, as he will be once again using a technique that he learned from the Rokushiki, as after barraging Muscular with the finger pistols, this is when suddenly Muscular would then see that he actually had multiple holes all around him, as he grit his teeth from the pain but was still able to continue on fighting, or at least that's what he thought. As he would try to once again attack Izuku, this is when suddenly he would then see that his muscles would then begin to get destroyed, and not just one of them but all of them. As you see, during the time that Izuku was barraging Muscular, he had actually been using another form of Haki, this being the advanced armament, as this actually caused the kinetic energy in Izuku's attacks to actually go through Muscular's muscles, causing them to actually explode. As Muscular will be reeling back from the pain enough to a point where he will literally be now on his knees screaming out in just pure agony, with Izuku then deciding to literally finish him off with a nasty kick directly to his face, breaking his nose and also knocking him out unconscious. As Izuku looked at Muscular's body that was now completely bloody and everything with no mercy. All the while, Koda would just be there watching all this in complete shock, considering the fact that Muscular was not someone who was easily able to be taken down, but yet Izuku was somehow able to do it. As he looks at Izuku in admiration but also in a slight bit of fear, as Izuku would then ask him if he was alright, with Koda saying yeah. As then later on, after making sure that Koda was okay and everything, and after preparing to take him back to Aizawa, this is when suddenly Shinso would then arrive to see everything, as he asked Izuku what was going on, with Izuku about to respond only for flames to then erupt, as this is when it would then be revealed that the camp itself was under attack by villains. Now Izuku seeing this then decides to immediately get into action, as picking up both Koda as well as Shinso, this is when he would then dash off directly towards the direction of Aizawa, with of course Shinso feeling very much embarrassed by the fact that Izuku is just able to pick him up as if it was nothing, he wasn't even exerting that much strength. As eventually after dashing through the forest, this is when he would then finally see Aizawa, as he would then drop off Koda before saying that the villains were attacking and everything, with Aizawa then deciding to give Izuku the permission to allow everyone else to use their quirks, to which Izuku would nod his head, as this is when he would then bring Shinso along with him, since Izuku was already forming up a plan in his mind. So for the next couple of moments, as we end up seeing Izuku and Shinso run through the forest, we will see things play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, with the only real difference being the fact that Shinso is there and also Izuku isn't injured, with Izuku just trying his best to help out in any way possible, as by maneuvering through the forest and everything and encountering a variety of villains, Izuku would just simply knock them out before continuing on moving. However, after doing this for quite a while, this is when Izuku would then finally run up onto his friends, as he sees them that, he sees that they're all okay and everything, as thanks to their training, they would actually be able to handle themselves way better, as after making sure that all of them were okay and everything, this is when Izuku would then reveal to them his plan. As if this plan were to work, which Izuku was most confident that it would, then they would be able to capture all the villains in one go. As right after discussing this plan, this is where we're now going to do a miniature time skip as we now change our attention to Dabi. We will see Dabi as he would just be there talking to Twice and everything, as suddenly walking through the forest will be none other than Toga as she ends up approaching the two of them. She ends up stating how she encountered a pretty awesome girl and also a cool guy, but unfortunately they had both gone away from her, so that meant that she wasn't really able to have her fun and everything. So as all three of them would just be there talking and discussing about the next plan of action, this is when suddenly, to their surprise, a huge wave of ice then bursts out of the ground and ends up enveloping all of them, as all of them would just be there captured inside the ice, not being able to move, as this is when suddenly Todoroki would then announce now. As once after hearing these words, this is when suddenly moving out of the forest would be none other than Uraraka, as she would appear touching every last one of these ice cubes before suddenly they would then fly up into the air. As once she had done that, this is when the rest of the group would then arrive. Now Dabi, who was encased in ice, would then suddenly begin to be freed from it by using his flame quirk. As once he did that, he would then try to melt his other two friends out of there, saying that these kids had no idea exactly who they were dealing with, only for Shinso to then speak up. As this is when he then makes a very mean insult to Dabi's mother, basically, as he does a your mama joke, which Dabi, hearing this, then begins to say that he was going to make sure that Shinso pays for that, only to be surprised as suddenly he would then lose control of his body, and his quirk had been deactivated. As this is when Shinso would then tell Izuku that the plan had worked, as this is when suddenly the final people to walk out of the forest will be none other than Izuku, along with Bakugo, as both of them will be dragging their own share of villains along with them, as Bakugo ends up dropping the teeth guy there on the ground, all the while Izuku would just end up dropping one of the guys that were there, the kid with the mask basically, as he had found him during the time when he was wandering throughout the forest. As to all of the villains' surprise, they had all actually been captured by a bunch of kids, a bunch of heroes in training that didn't even know how to be heroes completely yet. As this really surprised them, considering the fact that the plan that they had was supposed to work to a way better extent, but now it seemed as if they had failed, or at least that's what they thought. Until suddenly, this is when Mr. Compass would then arrive, as he would then begin to actually make use of his amazing ability and save the villains. Oh, who am I kidding? That guy is not doing anything. Yeah, I'm sorry, y'all. Mr. Compass would arrive there, but unfortunately, as he would try to use his quirk to, kind of capture the students and everything, it would actually fail tremendously. As right as Compass would arrive, Izuku would actually be able to react to him, as he actually was able to grab a nearby stick and immediately was able to send a wind slash so powerful enough to a point where it ends up knocking out Mr. Compass in one blow, as Izuku had predicted that he would arrive here thanks to his observation haki. As now that Mr. Compass had been defeated, that meant that now all the villains were now fully captured, including the ones that are facing off against the other pro heroes that were there, as they would all now be prepared to be taken away, as Izuku's plan would now be revealed to be a 100% success. As now that all the villains were now fully captured thanks to Izuku's group, this is where we will now turn to the end of the forest training camp, as eventually the heroes as well as the police would then arrive to take the villains away. As this would actually end up leaving a ginormous impact on not only just the entirety of the world, but also an impact more majorly on the League of Villains, or what's left of it. As by this point now, turning to the League of Villains, we will see that all that was left was nothing more but Shigaraki and Kodagiri. As Shigaraki can't believe that his plan had failed so spectacularly, as he 100% thought that they had been able to at least deal with these brats. But then again, now looking back on it, he then realized that Izuku Midoriya was way more of a threat than he realized, as he will be shown, scratching himself even more as he curses the brat. While at the same time, somewhere else, we will see All For One as he'll be watching, the news about the latest incident, and when he ends up finding out about what happened to the League of Villains, this is when he would then actually show a very rare frown for the first time, as he then realized that things are now currently right now in a bad situation, but maybe he might be able to salvage it. Maybe, as this is when he decides to move on with his next plans for Shigaraki, as we will now do another time skip. So now flashing forward to now the next following weeks that go by after the events of the forest training camp, we will see Izuku and the rest of his classmates as they will make a large amount of progress. Now since the villains have been captured and everything, they didn't really have to deal with too much stress as they're actually able to go about their regular school lives. Now, there is one interesting thing to know is the fact that the hideout raid arc would still happen. The only thing was Shigaraki as well as Kodagiri were not there. They had already fled the scene, since All For One had already predicted that the villains would most likely, they would most likely reveal the location where they've been staying at. So Shigaraki was advised to evacuate. But other than that, the students of UA, they were actually able to have a good time, and they were actually even able to get their professional hero license, as during this time they had actually take the exams and would be able to pass all of them this time. As both Bakugo and Todoroki, due to them maturing way more here in this timeline and being way more developed, this actually allowed them to pass their exams without having too much difficulties. And in fact, they'd gotten so mature enough to the point where Todoroki, when he encountered that wind guy or the wind user that he faced off against in the main timeline, he actually apologized to him just straight up after remembering exactly what he did to him. And the guy was actually caught off guard by Todoroki's change of personality, since he didn't look as if the same guy as he was, once before, where he was basically just trying to show the world about how much he resented his father. So that meant that the wind user was able to forgive Todoroki, and that allowed for Todoroki to actually pass the exams. So yeah, there was that. As now that they were done with their license exams, that meant that they were officially heroes, which actually ended up being very good, especially leading up to the very next arc. As this arc would be very different, mostly because of the fact that it would be during the time of when they would be taking internships once again. But you see, when they were taking the internships, this is when all of them would then be assigned onto a mission. This being the mission to finally take down the League of Villains. Because you see, after finally multiple days have gone by after trying to find out exactly where their base was located, the heroes were finally able to find out where they were, and more precisely where the main base of operation was. So when they end up having this opportunity, they would actually assign as many heroes as possible, including the students themselves. As you see, every last one of them had actually shown a proficiency when it comes to their hero work, so that meant they were actually able to tag along on this mission. And mind you, this would actually be the final mission that All Might would be sent on, as by this point now, he had been fully prepared for his retirement, seeing as he already had a successor planned out. So that meant that this was it, the final raid and the final battle that was commencing. Now for the raid, when it comes to the raiding of the League of Villains, we will see it happen instantaneously as we see all the heroes then rush in there, with Izuku getting separated from his classmates and everything, as all of them will be in different groups in general. As Izuku will be running throughout the base, taking care of multiple different villains, as he will just be knocking them out using Conqueror's Haki and nothing more. But as Izuku will be doing this though, this is when suddenly he would then encounter a particular room, as walking in there, this is when he would then see none other than Shigaraki, as he would just casually be there sitting down in this empty room with his head down. Now Izuku seeing this would immediately have a bad feeling about it, as he would approach Shigaraki with caution, wondering what exactly was going on here, as Shigaraki would not even acknowledge Izuku's presence until he got close enough. As once he did, this is when Shigaraki would then spring into action by suddenly slamming his hand to the ground, as Izuku's eyes would then widen, as this is when suddenly he would then use the Rokushiki to dodge out of the way, as the entire area that they were in will be destroyed by Shigaraki's one attack. As this attack will be so powerful that not only did it destroy the area, but also shook up the entirety of the base itself, causing everyone there to be very much caught off guard by it, as they wonder what was going on. As Izuku would jump away after, making sure to avoid the attack, this is when he would then point his katana directly at Shigaraki, asking him who exactly was he. Since from what Izuku remembered, the guy that he faced off that very particular day when during the USJ incident was not the same guy in front of him. Shigaraki was behaving way too differently. And this would show even more, as Shigaraki would then disappear and then appear right in front of Izuku, as he would then try to slap him in the face using his hand in order to disintegrate him. Only to then be surprised, as this is when Izuku is able to dodge out of the way before suddenly stabbing him in the stomach, as this usually would be a pretty fatal blow, as Izuku would make sure to slam him directly against the wall and making sure to keep him pinned down. But you see, even after getting stabbed in the stomach, this is when Shigaraki would then begin to laugh, acting as if the injury didn't happen, as this is when he would then grab Izuku's katana, and to Izuku's surprise, the blade itself would then rush before suddenly being completely broken apart, as Izuku would then suddenly gain distance, as the injury that Izuku had inflicted on Shigaraki would then begin to heal, as this is when Izuku then realizes that this is not Shigaraki, as this is when All For One would then begin to reveal himself, as he would then speak to Izuku, saying that it was very nice to meet him, and saying that he was already very much impressed with his abilities, as even though Izuku was quirkless, All For One could actually see that he had a large amount of potential, enough to the point where he could even see Izuku being a potential host, so that way he can, once again rise back up to power. But still, nonetheless, he has Shigaraki now, so he highly doubt that Izuku can keep up with him, especially with all the upgrades that he added. And Izuku seeing this would be cursing himself, as not only did he lost a large portion of his katana, as now the blade was incredibly broken, with him only having like a little bit of the blade left, but not only that, but he also was now faced off against a Shigaraki who was highly buffed at this point. Like, he had like a large amount of upgrades. So basically this was now a much harder fight, but still Izuku was confident that he could win. As right after coming to terms with the situation, this is where we would then see both Izuku and Shigaraki, or should I say All For One, then have their battle. As we see the two of them then rush at each other, with Izuku still being able to do some pretty big damage to Shigaraki, thanks to, using Haki, as well as still having the blade itself, even though a large portion of it was destroyed. And when Shigaraki sees this, he's very much impressed by Izuku, asking him to show him everything he has, with Izuku disappearing and appearing throughout the room, with Shigaraki trying his best to keep up with him, but failing. But it wasn't really like he really cared about trying to outspeed Izuku, mostly because of the fact that his damage range was way too high, as he affected the entire area, as using Shigaraki's quirk, he was destroying more and more portions of the base, as Izuku was forced to dodge out of the way, or else he would be caught up in the rubble, or he would just straight up be disintegrated. As this would happen for quite a while, as Izuku would be there hitting Shigaraki over and over again, while also avoiding the attacks, with Shigaraki just simply recovering thanks to a regeneration quirk that All For One had. As this will go on for quite a while, until eventually this one suddenly bursting into the room will be none other than All Might. As after seeing all the destruction that was happening, All Might was trying to track this room before eventually finding it. And when he ends up seeing Shigaraki, he then immediately rushes at him, until suddenly this is when, as soon as All Might collides with Shigaraki, this is when he would then hear the familiar chuckle of All For One, causing All Might to then realize who exactly this was. And to make even more worse was the fact that when these two begin to exchange blows, All For One begins to actually explain to All Might who exactly he was in control of in the moment, as that's when All Might finds out about who Shigaraki was, and more precisely who he was related to. As when All Might finds this out, he is completely horrified and left honestly extremely vulnerable, as this causes him to take very much heavy damage from one of Shigaraki's, attacks, as it ends up hitting him directly in the most injured area of his body, as this ends up knocking All Might out of his buff form, as he gets to him flying. As All For One begins to laugh at All Might's horrified expression, as well as the pain that he was in, as he begins to approach him, as he then prepares to finally finish off the symbol of peace and to go on his whole reign of terror. But right before he does that though, as he would try to touch All Might with his hand, this is when suddenly his hand would then be cut off by none other than Izuku, as he ends up intervening in the fight after seeing it go on for quite a while. As Izuku by this point has had enough of All For One, and more precisely, he had enough about this whole spiel and everything. As right after making sure to stop All For One from finishing off All Might, this is when Izuku will then tell him straight to his face that he's gonna finish him off in one blow. And when All For One hears this, instead of actually feeling fear, he begins to laugh at Izuku's face, as he once again regenerates the hand that Izuku just cut off, as he causes even more destruction, as Izuku will then take All Might away from the battlefield. As this will go on for quite a while, as other heroes would arrive, as this is when All For One begins to go on a whole rant and spiel, basically talking about his own philosophy and everything. And as he does, this is when, of course, many people that were there that were listening to this were actually pretty horrified, since All For One was basically this weird being that just had no regard for human emotions. He didn't care about any of that. And literally everything that he did was out of his pure selfish desires and nothing more. But yet there was one person though that was not shooken up by it, and one person who was about to finish it all in one blow, this being Izuku. It was after making sure to get All Might out of there, Izuku had been gathering a large amount of concentration, and more precisely, he was focusing all his Haki into his blade, or at least what was left of it. As once he did, this is when Izuku would then appear once again onto the battlefield, but when he does, a pressure begins to fill in. This pressure being so powerful that it actually shakes up the area. And when All For One feels this pressure, he immediately turns his attention onto Izuku, as he sees him approaching with a very serious look on his face, as this is when he would then begin to laugh, telling Izuku that it was pointless and that he was inevitable, as this is when he would then try to destroy the entire area, including Izuku within it. And when Izuku sees this attack coming his way, instead of running away or, doing anything a normal person would do, he would actually just stand there and actually try to take it head on, which causes everyone to think he was insane, until Izuku would then raise the broken sword up into the air. As then, using every last bit of his strength, Izuku would then swing down with enough force that it ends up causing even more destruction around the entire area, pushing everyone back and causing a slash to be sent out. as all for one to him it happened in slow motion with him not being able to do anything, as this dangerous slash filled with some type of energy that he has no idea about would come his way, easily cutting through his attack before suddenly slamming right into him. And when it does, All For One is not able to do anything, as this is when he would then feel his body get completely overwhelmed by the attack, as he was hit with so much force that his regeneration was now pointless. As after he's suffering this nasty blow, he will be sent flying and rocketing out of the base, as he will be sent flying extremely far enough to a point where it actually gains the attention of outside heroes, as they will literally see someone getting shot out like a missile basically, as he ends up crashing through multiple different areas before finally landing. As when he's shown once again, we will see Shigaraki with a Genommer slash across his chest, as he will now be unconscious. As Izuku, using everything that he knew about Haki and more precisely combining both advanced conquerors with advanced armament, he was able to make an ultimate attack. Basically an attack that not only negates durability, but also is just able to completely overwhelm the opponent and just knock them out in one blow. But the thing about this was the fact that since Izuku was not as proficient with Haki as he once was in his old life, this took a large amount of concentration. Luckily though, it still worked nonetheless, as Izuku would be there taking quite a few heavy breaths as he wasn't really too used to using the attack, but still nonetheless he pulled it off. As this is when many people begin to walk out as they all look at this scene in complete shock, as Izuku had done it. He had defeated All For One. As many people would then look at him in pure amazement before suddenly Izuku would then raise the sword up into the air, as this would actually signify that they truly had won the battle. It was now over. The League of Villains was no more. As everyone seeing Izuku pull the pose and after seeing that the battle was truly done, this is when they would then cheer, as finally after so many years they had finally gotten rid of the curse known as All For One, as Izuku would then look up into the sky with a smile on his face, as this is where we will now do one last time skip. So now flashing forward through multiple years now, after the events that went down with All For One and everything, we would actually see in many years of the future that the people in Class 1A, all of them had graduated. They have all gained successful careers, with many of them, becoming heroes. And as we end up looking at them, we can actually see that even though they all have their own lives, they were still pretty close with each other. As this ends up leading to quite a pleasant experience for all of them, as every last one of them were shown to have actually managed to live a pretty happy life. And actually taking a good look at the hero rankings during this point, we would actually see that many people in Class 1A were taking up the top spot, with at least 8 of them being in the top 10, with Uraraka being in 8th place, Ida in 7, and Shinso being in 6th, considering the fact that his quirk was just absolutely ridiculous to not be at the top spot. We also see Momo taking the 5th place spot, as well as Todoroki taking the 4th one, and for the final 3, we would actually see that Mirio would be in 3rd place, shockingly enough, as if you guys don't know, in this timeline, Mirio actually did gain One For All. But even with One For All, the other two just simply worked harder for their goals in order to reach the spot that they were rightfully in. As in 2nd place will be none other than Bakugo, as even though he most definitely was one to be known for collateral damage and everything, he did at least make an effort to actually save people, and it wasn't always about, just simply winning the battle. Although he was still a battle maniac, similar to that of Kenpachi basically, as whenever it came to villains and stuff like that, he was very stubborn when it came to taking them on by himself. And meanwhile, while Bakugo is holding on to the 2nd place title, the 1st place title would actually go to someone that was so surprising that it would forever go down in history. As a quirkless boy, one that many people would deem to have no future whatsoever, was somehow, some way able to overcome all odds and actually claim the top spot, with this being none other than Izuku Midoriya, or by his hero name, Thrillseeker. As literally, due to having multiple achievements under his belt and also due to being the one to defeat All For One, Izuku had been able to make a name for himself. Literally, he didn't care about the standards that people placed on him and was able to climb up all the way to the top spot, as he rightfully took the place of the number one hero and even taking up the title as a symbol of peace, with many people being amazed and honestly very much inspired by his stories, as we see many people try to become heroes, with not only those with quirks but also those without it. As now turning to the final moments of this What If, this is where we will then see Izuku once again, as by this point now he would just be chilling, as he would just be there taking a nice sip of sake, as yes, he is old enough to finally drink it, as he would just be there relaxing and smiling as he wonders what exactly is next for his life, what exactly is the next chapter, as he begins to think about different types of adventures and everything like that, as this is where we will then see Izuku as he then prepares for a journey. since after all, the world was big, so that meant that there was obviously more things to, explore and have fun about. As the very last moments of this would be Izuku, as he then heads off on his trip to see exactly what else that the world had in store for him. As now with this being the last scene we will see from this what if, this will be the end to what if Deku was Rayleigh's reincarnation. Thank y'all so much for tuning into this what if. I really hope you guys do enjoy, and I am so sorry y'all that this what if took so long to make. Trust me y'all, this what if was supposed to come out multiple weeks earlier, but the thing was, your boy was running into many issues. Number one being the fact that I had to they're doing a lot of renovations at my place right now. I'm going through large amounts of renovations. I'm traveling a lot. My routine is literally packed up with a bunch of things. It's hard to maintain all this. And you know what? I'm gonna actually give much more of an in-depth discussion about all this stuff when I make, when I start doing the stream and everything, which I will assure you that it will come up soon. But yeah, guys, it's your host Seiji Samurai here, and he's now signing off. So peace and have a lovely day.
Colors. This is the color. This is the color.